Hey friends, tonight we'll walk right through the heart of the lost colony of Roanoke. A hush lies over the outer banks. The dunes breathe in slow silver, and pine needles whisper as if careful not to wake the sea. Before we begin, please like and subscribe only if this truly helps you unwind. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now lie back and get comfortable. Let's begin tonight's story. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to our tale of 115 people vanished without a trace. Chapter 1: The Island Between Tides. The coast keeps its own time. Long, low islands hold back the ocean like slender hands, and behind their knuckles the water quiets into a wide, glassy sound. Grassy sound. Grasses bow and rise in the breeze, and the first light comes up pale as milk on the still water, then blushes along the edges of the reeds. If you stand very still here at dawn, you can feel the tide think, can hear the hush between waves where the day gathers itself and begins. Into this hush, small boats slide toward shore. They carry voices that have crossed an ocean, voices wary and hopeful, roughened by salt and the long pull of the oar. The year is 1587, and they have come to begin again families. Carpenters, gardeners, fishermen, a governor with a painter's eye and a grandfather's heart. His name is John White, and in a leather packet he keeps paper, pigments, and the habit of looking closely at the living world. He has sketched villages and people here before, the shape of palisades and gardens, the way a canoe sits in water like a feather laid flat. His images will travel back across that ocean and teach others to see a world they have not yet touched. The island that receives them is thin and wind-carved, a long sigh of sand and pine and scrub, lodged between ocean and sound. Roanoke, a place that belongs to water as much as to land, two tides as much as two seasons. They come ashore near the bones of an earlier English fort where timbers have weathered to a soft grey and the earthworks slump like tired shoulders. Somewhere in the brush a heron lifts, slow and deliberate. Somewhere farther inland, smoke threads the air from a camp they cannot see. There were men left here the year before 15 left, as a placeholder in a story that was supposed to pause and resume. Now there is only silence where their camp should be. A silence the newcomers will learn to read like a map stretched across the wind. They pitch tents where the trees break the wind, string sailcloth for shade, and lay out their hopes in careful rows like seeds pressed into a garden. To the south and east are friends whose language White has begun to learn. Men like Manteo whose paddles write quiet V-shapes on the sound as they come and go. Trading begins in words and gestures, and only then in things. A coil of cord, a length of copper, a small mirror that holds an astonished sky. White watches, then paints, trying to keep faith with color and line, recording how corn grows in careful mounds, how fish hang to dry in tidy rows, how houses are shaped to cup warmth and shed rain. His watercolors will one day be shown to those who have never felt this salt wind, and they will say, so that is how the world looks there. For now, though, the world is small, a ring of campfires, the salty smell of fish, the clink of iron nail against timber, the soft, steady talk of people turning a place on paper into a place that holds sleep. Streets have names in their minds long before they have ruts in the sand. The colony on paper is grand, the city of Raleigh with church and lanes and order. The colony in the wind is humbler. Stakes, rope, kitchen pits, a fence mended where the earlier fence failed. They make a pallet from reeds and call it a bed. They make a shelter from pine and call it a home, and by repeating the word enough times it begins to be true. Mid-August comes warm and bright, heavy with insects' music. In a house of rough boards and hope, a young woman in labor breathes through the hours while the island listens. Someone carries water, someone murmurs a prayer learned in another climate beneath different stars. Then the cry, small and fierce, the sound the heart makes when it chooses to live, and there she is, a new child in a world that will later make much of firsts and beginnings. They name her Virginia, a name that tries to hold more than one place at once. The home of memory and the home of the moment, the old world and the one opening like a shell in the hand. Later, storytellers will say she was the first English child born here. For now, she is only breath and warmth and milk and the steady drum of a mother's heart beside her ear. The days lengthen and shorten all at once. Summer is generous, but supplies thin easily on a sandbar world. Flour grows shy. Iron counts itself in careful handfuls. The plan drawn on maps, agreed upon in England, spoke of a harbour to the north. The Chesapeake, a safer cup of water, a site meant for a city on firmer ground. But plans bend when wind and will pull at them, and the pilot in charge of the voyage refuses to carry them farther. Summer is far spent, he says, in one tongue or another, and leaves them where they are. So they take what is before them and make of it what they can, as people have always done when a door they meant to reach stays closed, and the one swinging open is the one they did not choose. White looks at the people he loves, his daughter Eleanor, her husband Ananias. The small new child then looks at the stores and the sky, and understands what the island cannot give before winter. He decides on a bitter kindness, to go back across the ocean at once and bring what is needed. He will be as quick as wind and favorable tide, he promises. He will be back before the cold tucks teeth into the edges of the day. Before he leaves, he arranges a simple code that is almost a prayer. If you must move, carve the name of your destination on a post or a tree. If you are driven by danger, mark a cross above the letters. It is a precaution, as practical as it is tender, an agreement in wood that the sea cannot carry away. On the morning his boat pushes off, oars dip and rise as neatly as stitches. He is a father sailing away from his child's warm breath, and the water seems to understand and softens its voice for a little while. The colonists watch the small sail shrink to a chip of white, then to a brightness with no shape, then to a memory. They turn back to their tasks, mending, planting, fishing, and smoothing the frayed edge of hope with work. On shore, the world continues with its own simple clocks. Tide at the ankles, sun in the trees, birds making a necklace of the marsh in evening light. Across the ocean, other clocks begin to clang. Sails bloom not for trade but for war. England steels itself against a fleet vast enough to darken water and sky. And a little rescue voyage is delayed and delayed again by storms of iron, by need, by the way empires use ships for their own hunger first. Time so soft in the grass and along the reeds is suddenly hard as hammered coin. White weights, begs, bargains, boards and unboards. Watchers' months slough away like bark until the season and the war conspire to hold him back for not one winter but 3. On the island, sunrise follows sunrise as faithfully as breath. In London, alarms and news blur day into day like rain on glass. And so, beneath the lantern's quiet, Roanoke learns how to sleep and wake without him. The people listen for weather and for footsteps. They listen for the tone of voices that arrive by canoe. Friendship here is a braid neighbors and allies, memories and misunderstandings. Some nights bring feasts and laughter, others absence and guarded eyes. They trade fish for corn, a tool for a coil of fiber, a tale for a tale. Children learn the names of birds that have never flown above their English homes. Women learn how the soil here takes a seed and asks for ash and patience. Men shape fence and thatch against the long winds and learn how a storm on this coast is less a tantrum than a long-held breath turning suddenly to speech. One evening, a heron passes overhead like a slow stroke of a brush. Another evening, the water flares with torchlight and the catch is good, and women laugh with wet hands as silver fish knock softly in a wooden tub. On a leaner evening, when the sky has the color of pewter and the air tastes of rain, they gather the children closer and tell them what they tell themselves, that a ship is already on its way, that wood and flower and kind voices are following the star path across the waves. Hope, like a small fire sheltered by a cupped hand, burns best when watched. If they chose to consider other paths across the Sound to Croatoan Island where friends could shelter them, or inland 50 miles to a riverbank marked not on their hearts, but on White's careful maps, we cannot know the hour when those thoughts turned to plans. We know only the simplicity of their code. Carve your trail where love can read it later. Add a cross if day has turned to danger. Simple instructions, the sort that live easily in the mouth and the hand. And we know how wood accepts a knife and keeps memory longer than paper flapping in a storm. 3 summers turn, pines swell rings under resin. Babies learn their feet, skirts and nets wear and are mended. The island keeps its counsel, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a small boat finally leans into the Atlantic. Then another, and White at last feels the wind at his back. He is older by hard seasons when he steps again onto the shallows of Roanoke in August of 1590, the day some say the child's birthday. He wades ashore with men who look a little like ghosts in the mist and feels the island watching. He finds Prince. He calls. No reply answers from the palisade. What he finds instead is a word cleanly cut, standing on a post like a lantern, Croatoan. Nearby, 3 letters, crow on a tree. No cross. The homes are gone, as if carefully taken down and carried away. The garden plots sleep under weeds. The place looks less like a flight than a leaving. A message without panic, a direction without fear. White reads the word as a father reads a note left on the table. Plain, familiar, almost a relief. The agreement had named that island as refuge, the home of friends, and the shelter of Mantio's people. He turns his face toward the south, toward Hatteras, and tries to follow. But the sea, kind in one mood and implacable in another, throws up a storm with hands too strong for his tired ships. They cannot make the crossing, cannot bring bread and embrace, and cannot learn whether the word on the post was a promise kept. He is pushed back to England, his arms still full of air where his family should be. The mystery begins, not with darkness, but with a thwarted errand, with a father stranded on the wrong side of weather. What became of them after that word on the post is a path our chapter will follow gently in nights to come. Never running, stepping instead from clue to clue. Some say they crossed to Croatoan Island and were taken in by those who had already shared food and friendship. Some say they travelled inland along the rivers to a place White had marked beneath a patch on his map. 2 fields near a town called Metaquim, where sherds of English pots have turned up in the soil like shy confessions. Some say the colony did what living things often do in hard weather split. A little here, a little there, in small survivals rather than grand gestures. For now, we hold only the calm of the scene that White found. A word, no cross, a village dismantled rather than destroyed. We will listen to the archaeology another night. We will weigh the old accounts with quiet hands. Tonight we simply breathe with the island and remember how patiently it keeps its stories. The night deepens, the grasses hush again, and the sound holds the moon as if it were made to be held. A little wind slips through the palmetto and the pines and makes a music like distant sails. You can almost imagine the line of footprints from the palisade to the water's edge. Then the lighter prints of a child walking close to a mother's steps, and farther on, the clean burn of a cooking fire on another shore, and stories traded in 2 languages by people who pass bread and fish and news around the same circle of light. A place that was only a point on a map grows warmer and more human as the night goes on. If you listen closely, you can hear how the island speaks to anyone who will be still for a moment. It says that a house is only a house when it holds a voice, that a fence is only a fence when it promises to keep watch, that a name carved into wood is a thread for a loved one to find. It says that disappearance is not always vanishing. Sometimes it is a gentle folding into another shape, a quieter life beneath a known sky. And it says that history, like tide, leaves patterns on the shore that look clear until the next wave comes. So we end this first quiet chapter not with answers but with a feeling for the place where the questions were born. A barrier island that keeps the ocean's temper. An inlet that holds a reflection of the moon. A word cut into a post and a promise that help would follow. In the hush between waves, you can almost see the lanterns moving along the beach, the careful way hands lift timbers from one life and carry them into another, the calm with which a people choose the path that keeps their children fed and their elders warm. The rest we will trace together, night by gentle night, across the sound and inland along the rivers, listening for footsteps as soft as sand. Chapter 2. The Carved Word. Night folds itself along the dunes like a shawl, and dawn, unhurried, slips a pale ribbon across the sound. The air tastes faintly of salt and sap. Pine needles glitter with a dew that looks like quiet applause. In this gentle light, a small boat noses toward the island that once held a new city of hopes and now holds its echo. Oars lift and fall. Men breathe in rhythm with the water. And a man with a painter's hands and a grandfather's heart steps into the shallows, as if he is stepping back into a paused sentence he has meant for years to finish. John White moves carefully, not from age alone, but from the feeling that any sudden motion might scatter the thin silence that binds his memories together. His boots find the slope of familiar sand. He looks first for a figure on the palisade, then for smoke from a morning fire, then for something as simple as a line of footprints fresh enough to crease the day. The wind answers him in the long grass. The birds flicker from reed to reed. The gate stands ajar like a mouth that has nearly formed a greeting and then closed. He passes beneath the lintel and the fort opens all at once to the sky houses loosened from their timbers, garden plots gone soft with weeds, a yard where the sand has drifted into low, careful dunes as if nature itself were tidying up the corners. He calls a name that is more than a name, daughter. He calls another that is newer and tender on his tongue, granddaughter. The island holds those words and lets them fall like feathers. No one answers. On a post by the entry, there is a mark with the neatness of intent. It is not the scratch of accident or the crude gouge of anger. It is a word, each letter clean, an agreement carried out with a knife as carefully as one carves a spoon or mends a cradle, croton. The letters sit straight, almost calm, on a tree nearby. 3 more, the beginning of the same word. Crow, White, rests his hand against the carved surface, as though it were a shoulder, and for a moment the ache in his chest loosens into something like relief. They remembered. They marked the path as they had promised. There is no cross above the word, no sign of flight or terror, no shout carved into wood. There is, instead, a direction, an arrow without the arrowhead. He breathes and feels himself steady. He does not have them, not yet, but he has a thread, and threads are how lost things are recovered in this world. The others spread through the empty lanes. They stoop over a patch of ground to study the faint impression of a stake. They measure a row of posts with their eyes and say the phrases men say when work has been done with care and then undone with care. There are no ransacked chests, no scorched beams, no broken pots scattered in ash. The houses have been taken down as if to be used again elsewhere, timbers unpegged, thatch unwoven, a village folded into bundles, as one might fold a household for travel. Even absence can be orderly. Even leaving can be a kind of craftsmanship. White's gaze keeps returning to the word. In the slow years he waited, he once feared he might find only wind and ruin, the bitter punctuation of a cross. But this is an address. Mantio's people had been friends and anchors. Their island of Croatoan, a known refuge across the water under the long arm of the Outer Banks. If his colony moved as planned, it would be to those fires. The painter traces the groove of the sea with one fingertip, like a man finding his way by touch in a dark room. He thinks of a girl with a name as wide as a country. He thinks of the way a baby's first opens and closes as if practicing hello and goodbye. He thinks of a code agreed upon at parting. Mark your road in wood. Leave a cross only if danger walks with you. The wood, clean of crosses, steadies him again. They set a small table inside the quiet fort and unfold their hunger there. Bread breaks with a sound that feels loud against the hush. Men talk in low voices about soundings and shoals and the sudden dark temper of weather these weeks of late summer. They speak the name Croatoan as if it were a rope, one end held here, the other drawn through a needle's eye over the horizon. White listens until the talk becomes the shape of a plan. He knows what patience can do to a man's hope. Every hour that passes sits heavy as wet wool. They will go at once. When the tide turns, they push out, but the sea that let them in with its small, even breathing begins to gather itself. The wind edges from friendly to insistent. On this coast, storms do not always shout. Sometimes they persuade, a little harder and then a little harder, until choice thins to a single thread. The anchors strain. A cable parts with a sound like a snapped bone. Men curse softly and then grow quiet, because on water curses do not help and silence sometimes does. The ship heels. Another anchor is lost. To run for Hatteras in such a squall is to risk all, to strand on a bar and give the storm its due. The captain shapes the wind, tries again, fails, and at last shakes his head in a motion that is both apology and warning. The sea insists on a delay that feels, to the man on deck, like a verdict. White stands with one hand on the rail and squints into the driven spray, as though he could fill a gap, a path, a human-sized mercy in the weather. He reads again in his mind the carved word that is now behind them on the shore, and he imagines following it into a night bright with another village's coals, a circle of faces lifting to meet his across the fire. He imagines stepping into warmth with his hands held forward the way men do, when they are both cold and full of hope, and feels the ache of being kept from that threshold, when the captain orders the course made for open sea, for home ports that feel more like winter than rescue. The decision knots in White's throat. He has seen how carefully they left. He has seen the message written in wood. He is pulled away from it by weather and necessity, two of the oldest rulers of men. As the shoreline thins to a line, and then a thought, he closes his eyes and keeps the word with him, as if a carved post could become a talisman in a pocket. In this way, the mystery begins its walk amongst us. A man with facts in his hands is turned back by a willful wind, and what should have been a journey of a day becomes a gap of years and then of centuries. Ideas rush to fill the space where a homecoming should have unfolded. Shipwreck, scattering, welcome, hunger, winter, kinship, loss, quiet survival. History loves an empty chair. It sets out plates for every possibility. And yet, before story rises like fog across the marsh, there is the plain weather of those vanished years to consider. These islands teach a lesson the first night you lie awake under their wind. You belong to the sky here as much as to the earth, to the long moods of cloud and the brief tempers of rain. Far inland, the trees keep time in their rings with a patience men rarely match. Later scholars, laying thin slices of old wood under lenses, would read those rings like the careful tally of a hard season lean lines that say the late 1580s drew water tight as a fist in this corner of the world. A drought, springs stingier, corn thirstier, fish traps less sure. A village of newcomers would have learned the price of each mouth very quickly, the arithmetic of a winter that asks for more than you planned to pay. In such years, friendship is not a courtesy, it is a bridge, and bridges grow stronger when they are walked often and with gratitude. Imagine an evening midway through those empty years. The light has gentled to the color of unpolished pewter. White's daughter Eleanor walks down to the water's edge with her child sleeping against her shoulder, and she looks out over the sound to the veiled shape of another island. She thinks about the way a mother's hands belong first to her child, then to small work, then to a circle of women, then to a house, and only at the end of the day to herself. She has grown fluent with these sands, fluent with reeds and wind and the angle of sun that promises rain tomorrow. A canoe passes, and a woman in it raises a hand, palm soft and solemn in the late light. There is talk between shores that needs no interpreter, the universal language of tending, of food shared when food is tight, of a name offered and the sound of that name returned correctly, like a gift wrapped twice. A band of men walk the line where trees give way to marsh and check the snares. They carry their spades over one shoulder and listen to the gossip of birds in the crown of evening. Their English knives keep a good edge on cane and cord. Their English pots, prized for holding heat long and steady, sit beside fires where voices change from one tongue to another and back again as easily as a finger tapping a rhythm. Children from the settlement learn to steady a canoe the way they once steadied a toy on an English floor, laughter finding the same pitch. These images come not from certainty, but from pattern. This coast has always braided lives together, sound to island, river to field, camp to camp. The carved word on the post becomes, over seasons, less a single mark, and more a path, walked again and again. Some families might have gone at once. Others might have followed after harvest, after debate, after a newborn took stronger hold of breath. The fort, then, would have softened into sand and grass, not because strangers broke it, but because friends had made better roofs elsewhere. The leaving would have felt less like disappearing than like crossing a familiar threshold for the last time and pulling the door softly closed. Return now to the deck where White stands with his refusal lodged like a stone under the rib. The refusal not of men, but of weather itself. The captain measures risk and finds no room inside it for hope. The ship wears round, following a compass that favors survival. White watches the coast slide under cloud, growing less precise with every hour, until, at last, the dunes are only a low thought along the edge of sight, and then are gone. He must carry the carved word back to England like a shell that cannot be pressed to any ear but his own. In London, rooms close around sound. Stories gather at tables. They lean forward. They repeat themselves. The unknown is a hungry guest. It keeps asking for one more plate. White's careful drawings of people and plants and villages, those windows he made years before, are brought out and looked at with a different ache. Not curiosity now, but longing. Patrons count coins in their heads. Weather is discussed with the authority of men who have never stood in it. The war's veil is thinner, but the old urgency, ships for defense, ships for taking prizes, still pulls at the docks. White is an old man on a road that no longer leads where he needs it to. Meanwhile, the tide keeps telling the same attentive story to Roanoke, to Croatoan, to the mouths of the rivers where brackish water learns the names of inland trees. Canoes cut their quiet angles. Nets lift and spill their short rain of silver. A child with a face that honors two worlds at once carries a clay pot to a doorstep and turns to watch a crane step like a measured thought through the shallows. The life of ordinary evenings continues somewhere just out of sight of the mast and the spyglass. The Empire writes fewer lines about such evenings, but they are a country's true paragraphs. If, decades later, a traveller were to sit with the descendants of those who lived along Hatteras and farther inland and listen closely, he might hear the softer edges of a story about people who joined and were welcomed, about eyes that looked a little different, about names that carried a salt-sweet foreignness that soon felt ordinary by firelight. If, centuries later, hands with trowels and brushes eased soil from a sherd of English pottery near a river bend where no English house ever stood, the small thing would shine like a calm star in the archaeologist's palm. Each clue would be thin as a reed and just as strong in a bundle. The story would change its clothing from vanishing to weaving, from loss to joining, until it fit more comfortably around human shoulders. For tonight, we hold our pace. We do not run the length of time to collect what later pens and spades have claimed. We stay instead with the gentle facts at the beginning. A word cut straight, a cross absent, a fort unmade with care, a father turned back by weather, an island that will never speak aloud, and yet keeps breath and wave ready for anyone who will stand and listen. We note, in our quiet ledger, that the years which held the colony were lean ones in the tree's memory, that storms on this coast are as much policy as Parliament, making decisions no man in London can overrule, that friendship is not an ornament but a way across winter. And so, beneath the lantern's quiet, we leave White for a while with his carved word cupped like an ember in the mind, and we drift toward the coast that word names. We imagine a shoreline where fires bead the dusk and voices coil up into the pines. We imagine timbers from a former life set as thresholds in a new one, a cradle rocked where the wind wears a different rhythm, a prayer spoken in two languages until it feels like one long, patient breath. We imagine a child taught to read water first and then letters later, tracing in the sand the same shapes her grandfather once traced on a post. In the hush before sleep takes us fully, the mystery is no longer a door slammed shut, but a room opened into another room, with footprints carrying forward and not erased. We will follow those prints tomorrow, slowly, kindly, across the sound and up the rivers, and into the long company of evidence that asks to be listened to, not conquered. Tonight, let the carved word be enough. Let its straight lines steady the heart. Let the tide write the margin notes that say only patience, patience, patience. Chapter 3. Where the fires were. Night slides off the water like a shawl, and the day arrives in a low, pearly wash. The wind combs the sciotes in patient strokes. Far across the sound, a darker line of trees leans over another shore, and between here and there the channel gleams like a quiet thought carried from one mind to another. In this gentle light, an answer that has taken centuries to form begins, not with thunder, but with cooking smoke that rises straight when the air is kind. Croatoan, an island name, yes, but first a people, a kinship, a cluster of homes and gardens strung along the inlets where canoe paths cross like threads. Imagine the shore at dusk. Fish racks stand above the tide with their silver-brown tassels. A pot, the color of baked earth, rests near a low fire whose coals have been trained to hold heat and patience together. Voices shuttle between work and quiet. Children step from sand to water and back again, their heels making small commas in the day's last sentence. In such a place, crossings are ordinary. The water is short. The stars are longer. Into this evening, one by one at first and then as families, people from Roanoke would have passed, carrying what they could lift without breaking, moving timbers that knew how to be houses, bundling tools that knew how to be useful, and following the straight lines of a message carved in wood. They were not strangers here. Friendship had already gone before them in the steady figure of Manteo, whose canoe had become a familiar seam in the water, whose language had folded English words beside Algonquian ones until the two lay closer, not the same, but nearer in the mouth. In White's plan, that island was a refuge if need pressed. On the post, the letters made clear that need had pressed, and that the leaving was a choice, not a flight. White's 1590 account describes finding Croatoan carved on a post and crow on a tree, with no distress cross, which he took as a sign the settlers went to Croatoan Island. Later, summaries preserve the detail of the dismantled village and thwarted follow-up voyage. To picture the welcome, lean first upon what the earliest English observers actually saw and drew when the world was new to their eyes. John White's watercolors, careful and attentive, catch a village in bird's eye. Houses shaped to keep warmth and shed rain. Fields in neat mounds where corn climbs beside beans. Paths looping like sentences that have learned the grammar of seasons. Thomas Harriot's pages sit beside those images, listing the steadier truths of a place. The fish, the roots, the grains, the gardens, the medicines, the customs of exchange and ceremony. These records do not belong to the colonists alone. They were learned from the people who already knew how this land asked to be lived with. In them, the ordinary becomes luminous. A drying rack, a woven mat, a canoe stitched from bark and skill. White's Secaton watercolor and other plates, together with Harriot's 1588 brief and true report, are primary windows onto late 16th century Algonquian life on this coast. And so, beneath the lantern's quiet, imagine the shape of evenings shared. A borrowed pot holds stew. A borrowed word holds thanks. A tool traded last year returns this year as help. The hands that once mended a palisade now mend fishing weirs and baskets. A blacksmith's small fire, if they kept one, sends its faint star spray into the night. Each scale of iron a dot of work hardened in air. In our own century, spades and sieves have lifted such work's ashes again, hammer scale by the bucket. The glitter of metal labor that settles where iron is struck and folded and struck again. It is a durable punctuation in soil, the sort that says, with no rhetoric at all, people with iron habits stood here. beside people with old coastal knowledge, and life was busy in the same circle of light. Recent coastal reporting describes new finds on Hatteras buckets of hammer scale, supporting a picture of English metalworking activity alongside Croatoan life. Archaeologists have, over decades, traced more such threads. Near Cape Creek, on Hatteras, they have gathered a scatter of English things pulled through time into daylight: bits of gunlock, shards of European pottery, a small signet ring engraved with a prancing creature found among Croatoan objects in layers that speak of trade, repair, and reuse. None of these, by themselves, deliver a single triumphant answer. Together, they begin to sound like ordinary evenings again. A borrowed tool that never left, a gift kept, a salvage repurposed when stores ran lean. This is how people live, by tucking the useful into the everyday and forgetting the day when the useful first crossed a threshold. Finds from Cape Creek include a signet ring, a snaffen's gunlock, and European ceramic fragments reported by projects in the late 1990s, 2010s. Farther inland, another quiet storyline has formed under fields near the mouth of Salmon Creek, where a patch on John White's own map hid a symbol for a fort 50 miles from the sea. When light was cast through that 1580s sheet at the British Museum, researchers saw what had once been covered, a small shape like a plan, an emblem for a place as yet unbuilt or already hoped for. Shovel and trowel have since turned up, not headlines, but long patience. Small pieces of English pottery amid native town traces, a suggestion that some portion of the Roanoke Company may have walked upriver and stitched themselves to a cornfield's companionable calendar, 2 camps, then, not one, some 2 Croatoan, some inland where soil was kind and water steady, each thread thinning or strengthening by season. The British Museum patch and the Site X work in Bertie County have been publicized by the First Colony Foundation and covered in popular and local venues, pointing to late 16th century English materials inland. Listen also for a voice a century on. John Lawson, walking this coast in the early 1700s, took notes the way careful travelers do on fish runs, on soils, on the look of a sky before rain, and wrote down a local memory from Hatteras, that some ancestors were white people who could talk in a book, and that grey eyes were not uncommon there. He heard, too, a pride in kinship with those earlier arrivals. Memory is not a court record. It is a fire told around, and it changes with the weather of years. But Lawson's words, born closer to the hour than ours, fold gently into this picture of joining rather than vanishing. Lawson's 1709 New Voyage to Carolina includes the oft-cited note about Hatteras people claiming descent from white ancestors, with grey eyes mentioned. If you ask the trees what the late 1580s felt like, they will tell you their narrow rings kept poor time dry years that asked more of corn and patience than plenty could answer. Scholars laid those rings side by side and measured the thirst of seasons. The verdict was plain. 1587 through 1589 ran leaner than any 3 in centuries across this tidewater. In such years, a palisade built for a city on paper becomes, in practice, a sieve through which flour runs too quickly, and friendship becomes not ornament but bridge, a move to where kin and food were closer, or upriver, where fields were richer, would be less a mystery than a household's good sense. Tree ring analyses published in Science identified 1587 to 1589 as the most extreme 3-year drought in the region's 800-year reconstruction. Now, turn back, slowly, to the shore at Croatoan, as dusk grows blue. Cooking smoke flattens, and then threads upward again. Someone checks a net pinned in the shallows, his steps set exactly between hidden oyster cuts. Someone turns a pot with a folded cloth and tastes the edge of the evening. A few English words live here now, softened by other vowels. A few English things live here, repurposed for a home that understands wind. Children run, pause, and look toward the sound where lamps once shone at Roanoke, and a mother's hand rests on a small shoulder in the universal language that says, "Stand near." There are 4 or 5 ways to tell the story of these years, but only one that knows what it is like to carry a child through a winter. That version is always practical, always kind, always choosing a fire where bread and safety have agreed to meet. The larger world stayed noisy. Empires measured coastlines with compasses and dreams with coin. But history's wider sentences do not trample the small truths beneath our feet. That a word carved on a post can be a clean direction. That a village taken down carefully is a sign of calm hands. That the water between 2 islands is a bridge if the weather lets it be. The men who later stood on Roanoke and made legends from absence were hungry for a vanishing act. They looked for darkness and found a door. Our ears, hear by the hush of the sound, hear the quieter story, the one in which people keep children warm and seed corn dry, and identity both held and widened, stitched with new thread rather than torn. In time, stories about blue eyes and reading and English things in native houses pooled in the low places of memory. In time, sherds were raised from the ground gently and compared with old world cousins by color and paste. Not because artifacts shout answers, but because they murmur the company they kept. In time, a patched place on a map announced itself when a lamp was held beneath it, and a small symbol for a fort glowed out, as if to say, there was always another plan, or at least another hope. Each of these is a thin reed. Together, bound, they make a mat you can sit on while the water speaks. None of this asks you to rush. The night wants slower steps. Walk the sand. Count the lighted doorways on the farther shore. Hear a word pass from mouth to mouth across generations, Croatoan changing a little as it travels, carrying a companionship across centuries that resists the romance of disappearance. On one fire's side, a woman grips a paddle. On the other, a man checks the temps of iron at a makeshift anvil. Between them, a child reaches out with a piece of bread and a name that fits more than one world. And so, beneath the lantern's quiet, the mystery softens into ordinary life shared across a short run of water. There is a small bravery in that, and a larger wisdom. Storms will stand in a man's way. Drought will thin the soil's voice. Empires will be busy. But the human answer to lean years and long waits has always been the same. To look for fires already burning and step into their circle. To make home where hands meet. To learn a new cadence and still keep the old songs somewhere warm. Tomorrow, if you like, we will move upriver, following the stitched line on the map beneath White's patch and letting the fields teach us their own slow grammar. Tonight, we leave our feet on this sand and our eyes on the steady glow across the sound, where tools and stories and marriages made practical bridges, quiet ones you can cross in your sleep. Chapter 4. The Map Under the Lamp. Dawn leans over the inlets as if reading a quiet page. Mist lifts from the water in thin, thoughtful ribbons. Some mornings, the sound wears its glass face. Others, it shivers like silk touched by a careful hand. Today, it is both still in the coves, bright and moving in the channel, and the canoes slide forward, as if they were lines of ink willing themselves across a blank. Rivers begin as hush and become direction. From the wide throat of the sound, creeks narrow into green corridors where cypress lift their knees out of black water like listeners leaning closer. Egrets bead the edges, a turtle breaks the surface, regards the world as if it has all day, and sinks again with the gravity of old thought. Here, the current does not shout, it persuades. It says, "Come inland a little. The soil is kinder there. The wind is a softer argument." And so, in the hush between waves, imagine a small company of families whose feet have learned to read sand, going upstream to read earth. They carry not trunks, but bundles. They carry timbers cut to be remade, iron that remembers flame, seeds whose names travel easily in any mouth. They do not hurry. People seldom do when the day's work has to last the season. A canoe nudges through lilies, and the green saucers part with the tact of good hosts. Along these bends, fields have long been set like polite rooms. Corn rises in mounded grammar, the way it does when hands have learned the old rule plant with beans and squash, so the stalk can be ladder, the vine can be shade, the ground can be held and fed by what it holds and feeds. Smoke climbs straight on windless mornings, and it is a relief to the eyes. Nets hang, mended with a confidence that comes from years. Dogs doze beside doorways. A pot the colour of riverbank warms at the lip of a hearth, and when it is stirred, the whole house takes a breath. The English things come as guests, and then, in time, as furniture. A knife's edge keeps company with cane blades and bone. A small iron hook learns to be helpful at a doorpost. A shard of glazed bellamine slips into a child's pocket as treasure and is lost again under leaves where centuries will keep it. A man who once matched bellows to a forge learns the river's rhythm while striking iron on a smooth, patient stone. He does not call it an anvil. He calls it enough. By night, fires are the truest map. They mark who holds the story this evening. They mark where marriages are blessed in 2 languages and 2 ways of counting kin. Listen, bread is passed hand to hand. Fish oils the lip of a bowl. Someone tells a winter tale about the way the moon once fell in love with a river and has not stopped looking since. Someone answers with a story about a ship whose white wings folded and would not open until every stranger learned the word for thank you. On a table far removed, years and an ocean away, a different light burns. A lamp is set beneath a sheet of parchment. An old map warms. The pigments remember the brush. The fibers remember the plant. Under that small sun, a patch shows its secret. A tiny device like a plan for a fort. Tucked where river meets river, where soil darkens with promise, 50 miles or more from the salt. It is not a proof. Proof is a word for courts and wagers. It is a nudge, a suggestion in the language of cartographers, saying, hope once pointed here. Perhaps feet did too. The map's whisper matches what the water has been saying for seasons fields. Fresh water, shelter from the long hand of ocean wind. Imagine the way a decision like that arrives. Not as a trumpet, as a morning. You wake, and the corn asks for weeding, and you say, tomorrow we follow the creek to where the soil is darker, and then you keep your word. You do not burn your old house. You lift it. You fold rope and roof into new shapes. You walk. The old place does not become an absence. It becomes an address you can still visit by memory and, on kind days, by canoe. In a year when rain keeps its distance, the rings of trees tighten as belts. It is a slow, stern sentence written in wood. Women count jars, men count fish. Children learn to count steps between shade and river. A move inland to where springs speak more generously and fields are cupped by the breeze is not mystery. It is housekeeping at the scale of a people. It is the gentle arithmetic of survival. News moves by water. From Croatoan to the Abrevur fields, a messenger's paddle is a metronome keeping kin in time. In his canoe ride, beads of glass, traded last season, and a fine drill of shell and stone that can make those beads into a strand. He carries a short knife to mend rope and a longer story to mend rumor. When he arrives, women rise without fuss and set another bowl. Children edge closer, for the sweet of it. Visitors mean a little more talk, a little later bedtime, a second helping of laughter. What does a day look like where two worlds keep house together? A roof is rethatched with hands that learned the pattern before one language met the other. An English adze bites cedar and then rests in a rack woven from cane. A child answers to two names with equal speed. Prayers are said that ask for the same mercy in different words. A woman sings a mother's tune whose shape her neighbor cannot catch, but whose purpose needs no translation. And when evening settles, someone points to a star and says the word for it twice, once in each tongue, and both are accepted. From the coast, rumor wanders like a goat, curious, not malicious. A trader speaks of men apriver, who wear cloths like the sea people, and whose beards sit like winter birds upon their faces. Another swears he saw a knife stamped with a foreign mark near a town where the corn is tall and laughter taller. From the north, other rumors travel downstream, wearing the footprints of men who will later build their own hard places on other rivers. They will ask the land to be England, and the land will oblige only where it chooses. They will listen poorly and declare conclusions quickly. They will write as if they were alone in hearing stories that have been told around fires long before their ships found the river's mouth. But in these early years, voices are smaller and the stars larger. The coast is not yet a ledger. It is a conversation. Some evenings, the old fort by the sea visits the mind like a dream. A woman remembers the sound of wind through its pale emptiness the day they left. A man remembers how carefully he unpegged a beam that had learned his hand and thought, "We will use you again. You are too well made for weather." A child remembers a carved word and thinks of it now as a direction rather than a mystery. They have become the story others will hunger for and may never hear fully, and that is all right. A life does not owe itself to every mouth that asks. A visitor from far away years from now, and carrying ink instead of corn, will write that people on the Long Island spoke of forebears who could scratch meaning from paper, that some eyes were the color of river in bright noon, that kinship had widened without breaking. He will notice gardens and measurements, and the sound a fish makes when it is pulled from a net, and he will pass on. Others will arrive with spades and patience. They will sit in the shade during the hot hours and pick the ground clean in the cool ones. They will find what the hand forgets, but the soil remembers slivers and scales and a broken hinge of iron, a bead that still holds light. They will not find a headline. They will find afternoons. Between one shore and the next, a rope of visits continues. Corn is traded for fish. News is traded for song. In one house, a belt made of woven copper and shell catches the last of the light, like a last word said well. In another, a wooden chest from the first days has become a bench. Its iron has been mended with riverstone and goodwill. Some nights, names echo faintly across the water the way old names do, traveling farther than you would expect, getting softer and then surprisingly clear again. A storm will always have its say. Some summers it walks the beach. Some autumns it rearranges the channels like a careful but unsentimental housekeeper. In certain years, the ocean refuses to be only background music and steps into the stanza with both feet. When that happens, you do not argue, you lean on kin. The fires on the far shore burn a little brighter those nights, and the canoes travel in pairs. Time keeps to ledgers, what was meant and what was made. On one page, a city on the Chesapeake with a harbor like a cup in a steady hand. On the other, the quiet reweaving of families along barrier islands and river bends. On one page, a governor's quick return. On the other, whether with a longer plan. Neither ledger is a lie. They sit in the same book, and the book is called How People Survive. Years later, men in different coats will stand at different inlets and try to count the past with a spyglass. They will call into woods that do not answer them. They will sketch outlines and give them names that have not asked to be given. They will write vanishing where a quieter word might have done. But if you ask the marsh grass which story it prefers, it will bend first toward the shore where children play and a small forge chimes and a grandmother hums a tune that fits the rocking of a canoe. It will bend toward joining, toward the soft arithmetic of shelter and seed. The map under the lamp will be folded again and kept. It will cross oceans and generations. It will be looked at with scholarly eyes and with eyes that have simply missed someone for a very long time. It will not confess. Maps rarely do. They hint. They give you enough to walk a little farther and listen a little longer. The patch will be discussed over tea and over field lunches. And meanwhile, the river will keep doing what it does, carrying silt and rumor, fish and families, questions and answers, until all of them become simply the water's body. When evening arrives along the inland fields, it does so without agenda. A boy chases a moth and then stops because the moth has chosen a doorway post and looks suddenly like a small, serious flame. A woman lifts a pot, and the smell of corn and fish and green things fills the low room with the uncomplicated promise of supper. A man who was once a stranger to this river straightens the post of a drying rack and feels, without words, the rightness of the angle. He turns and sees his child's face in the amber corridor of firelight features from one country resting in the gestures of another, and the ache that once lived under his ribs softens. He does not think, I am the answer to a future's question. He thinks, this will do. This is home. And so, beneath the lantern's quiet, let the chapter end on the same shoreline where it began, though we are now much farther inland than the water seems to admit. Let the map glow briefly in your mind, then dim. Let the patch be a suggestion, not a verdict. Let the whispers of rivers and gardens tell you the only truth that feels like rest. That what looked like vanishing may have been the oldest human work of all unpacking in a new place, learning its weather, learning its people, and waking each morning to the careful business of belonging. Tomorrow we can follow other voices, the rumors that traveled to other colonies, the reports folded into letters, the footprints left in memory where paper did not reach. Tonight we set our paddle across the gunwale, watch the last light climb the undersides of leaves, and hear the soft, bilingual hush of good night pass around a circle of faces. Chapter 5. Echoes on the Wind. The morning opens like a pale shell. Sea oats tilt and whisper, the sound threading every dune with a hush that feels like memory. Beyond the long bar, the ocean keeps its old, patient breath. Between shoal and sound, stories cross as lightly as a sandpiper's feet. And so, in the quiet, we listen not for thunder, but for smaller things. A carved word remembered, a wave-worn shard of pottery, a sentence in a traveller's notebook, a pinprick fort sketched beneath a patch on a map. We listen because answers here are not doors that swing clean and sudden, but curtains that move with the wind, letting a little more light through each time, along the palisade at Roanoke. The letters once read Croatoan, cut straight and calm. White saw no distress mark, no cross, and read the message as men read a familiar hand. They went south to friends, wait for fair weather and follow. That fair weather did not come, and the following failed. Still, the carved word endured like a compass, pointing gently across the water. When White's voice fell away into the noise of London docks, other voices took up the question. Ships anchored far up a different river. Jamestown planted its hard beginning in mud and worry. Captains bartered news as if it was salt. They heard of villages where people wore European cloth. They traced rumours about 4 men who remaineth from Roanoke. Notes scrawled on a rough map that crossed an ambassador's desk like a tide-borne leaf. The chart later called the Zul IGA map carried in its spelling and hurry the feel of a story told at arm's length and inked before it cooled. Hearsay is not proof, but it is a direction, and directions matter when a coastline is more water than land. Long afterward, a traveller walked the same coast and wrote in a clean, observant hand that people on Hatteras Croatoan claimed white forebears who could talk in a book, and that grey eyes were not rare there. Pride travelled in that sentence too, the kind that sets another bowl at the fire for old kin. Memory is a soft instrument. It changes with weather and the angle of light. But Lawson's note, placed gently on the table of time, tells us at least that joining was thinkable and perhaps lived. The trees themselves kept their own ledger, inside rings of old cypress. Scholars later read the lean strokes of the late 1580s, the driest 3-year span in centuries in these tidewaters. Drought is a quiet tyrant. It shortens patience and grain alike. It makes every net and field more urgent. In such years, doors nearest food and friendships stand open widest. A move across water to known allies, or inland to kinder soil, sounds less like mystery than good housekeeping. Hold now a different kind of light. In a London room, someone placed a lamp beneath John White's richly painted map. Under the glow, a small hidden symbol brightened a tiny plan of a fort at the head of Albemarle Sound, where rivers meet rivers, about 50 miles from the sea. A patch had covered it. The light teased it back. Was it the intended haven never built, or a hint that feet had indeed gone inland? The image is not a trumpet. It is a nudge, but nudges, taken together, sketch a path you can walk slowly with your eyes. Archaeology, patient as dusk, has lifted more whispers. On Hatteras old Croatoan spades and brushes turned up English things in native layers. A gentleman's signet ring, a snaffint's gunlock, European ceramic sherds living among local pots and shell beads. None of these alone pronounces a verdict. Together they describe evenings where iron met fire near nets and fish and stories in 2 tongues. The rings, metal and date are argued over. The gunlock's temper is less shy. Either way, such objects murmur of close company between Croatoan families and English hands. Farther inland, at the place some now call Site X, near Salmon Creek, small English sherds border where, a quiet green from another world, have risen from fields beside traces of town and garden. The finds are modest, like footprints where grass has grown back, and scholars debate what those footprints mean. But when you set them beside the hidden fort on the map, the picture brightens. Perhaps part of the Roanoke Company threaded upriver 2 seasons more generous, while others stayed or moved among Croatoan kin along the coast. 2 fires, then 2 kinds of shelter. 1 small people learning to survive by dividing, not vanishing. Even our own century sends small sparks. On Hatteras, Sifted soil has yielded glittering hammer-scale flakes of iron-born when a smith's blows set sparks into air and ash. Such residue is a stubborn witness. It settles where people bent metal to their will. Not everyone is persuaded. Good arguments in good faith are part of careful work. Yet the pattern English craft residues inside Croatoan places fits a simple story. Some of the Roanoke families found steadier life among neighbors and made themselves useful there. Of course, the wind also carries louder stories. Once, in the middle of the last century, stones appeared, many stones speaking in chiseled English, telling a drama of travel and graves and long wandering inland. They stirred headlines and hope, then fell apart under patient checking. Most were likely made by modern hands, chasing old fame. Perhaps one, the very first, still sits in a grey corner of uncertainty. Hoaxes are noisy, history is quiet. The quiet endures. Other claims have braided the Roanoke tale to living people's origins, sometimes with pride, sometimes with politics. Some communities have told and retold traditions of descent. Scholars have argued for and against with documents and doubt in equal measure. Genealogists have probed the edges of DNA, but bones do not speak from a colony that left no graves to count, and time smudges every signature. Here, too, the wise posture is gentleness, to let identity rest with the people who carry it, and to let the past be a companion, not a weapon. And yet, beyond debate and ink, the simplest image remains. A village dismantled with care, a word carved without panic, a father turned back by weather, two shores conversing by canoe, a path upriver where garden soil darkened and gave more willingly. The wider world prefers a flourish vanished, it says, and shivers itself awake on the thrill. But the coast whispers a different verb. Moved. Moved to friends. Moved to fields. Moved as people move when children need food and winter wants a roof. The empire lost track. The families did not lose themselves. Imagine, if you like, one of the last evenings before the leaving. The fort smells of pitch and salt. The palisade throws a long shadow shaped like a dial. Someone has already lifted a house beam and tested its weight. A mother wraps a bundle that is more cradle than pack. A boy presses his ear to a shell and hears what he believes is the voice of a ship. A girl answers that it is only the seas breathing, and that both are good. Later, by firelight on Croatoan, the ring of English words please, bread, thanks blends into the cadence already living there, and laughter takes no side at all. Or picture an inland dusk. The frogs have begun their soft arithmetic. Children chase moths between mounded corns. Someone in a hut with a low door places a small green sherd on a sill to catch moonlight. Someone else turns an iron tool, squinting with the pleasure of work well mended. A woman hums a tune learned on a far sea. Her neighbor listens with her head tilted, then joins on a different note, and the two lines fit. We will never hold each hour of those years in the palm like a smooth stone, but we can hold patterns, drought in the trees, a hidden fort on a map, notes from Jamestown about clothed strangers, a traveller's line about grey eyes, English craft in Croatoan houses, English sherds in a riverside field. Each is a reed. Together they make a mat strong enough to sit on, while the wind moves the grass. And what of endings? They are not always catastrophes. Sometimes they are thresholds. The story that began as a city on paper grew into smaller, humbler rooms, rooms that would never see a census, rooms that did not send reports back across an ocean, and rooms that held a sleeping child and a winter's harvest. and a pair of hands learning the new angle of a borrowed tool. The palisade returned to sand, the carved post weathered to a pale blur. The people walked out of a myth and into a life. Beneath the lantern's quiet, let that be enough tonight. If a gull cries over the bar, let it be the voice of weather, not alarm. If an oar knocks once against a canoe's side, let it be the tide telling secrets it will gladly tell again tomorrow. The dunes you hear those long, slow pages turning do not demand certainty. They ask only that we listen with kindness, and if, on some future morning, another sherd rises, another sliver of iron glints, another old note turns up in a long-closed cabinet, we will lay it gently with the others and make no haste. Mystery here is not a cliff, it is a shore, and shores are made to be walked at the pace of breath. Chapter 6. What the tides keep. Evening leans its shoulder to the dunes, and the day folds without hurry. The sound turns to pewter, then to ink. Somewhere off beyond the bar, a single breaker keeps time for the world. Closer in, the cordgrass breathes like someone sleeping well, and so, in the hush, we gather the small pieces, once more the carved word that stood like a lantern on a post, the map that confessed a hidden fort when a lamp warmed it, the sherds turned up like moon slices from old fields, the hammer scale that glittered where iron met habit, the line in a traveller's book about grey eyes and reading hands. None of these is a trumpet. Each is a reed. Together they make a mat strong enough to sit upon, while we listen to the coast speak in its old grammar of wind and tide and patience. If story were only a matter of declarations, we would have finished long ago. But story, like these islands, is a place between ocean and sound, between leaving and arriving, between a city on paper and a life that holds a child asleep in a bent elbow. The people we have followed through these nights did not vanish. They practiced the older art of remaining changing rooms, changing roofs, changing neighbors, but keeping breath and names and the unremarkable courage that sets water to boil each evening and lays beads of gratitude along the day. Picture, for a last time, the hour before the leaving. The fort is tidy with decisions. A beam is lifted the way one lifts a future. A kettle cools, then is wrapped in a woven mat whose pattern remembers hands more than words. Someone runs a palm along a doorway as if smoothing a thought. A child asks a question that is more rhythm than grammar. A mother answers in two tongues, and both are true. The carved word waits at the gate, quiet as direction itself. Canoes ride the shallows, black commas against the pale claws of water. When the paddles bite, they do not argue with the tide. They promise to keep time with it. Now walk, softly, into the rooms their lives became. On Croatoan, a hearth where fish and corn speak a simple treaty in steam. A man, once a stranger to this coast, turns a tool that marries iron to wood and feels the old pleasure of right angles found by eye, not ruler. A woman ties a cord for her neighbor and says a blessing that tastes of salt and smoke. Children chase moths through a summer doorway and stop at the threshold, because their elders taught them thresholds are thin places where care is needed. English things are no longer visitors. They are furniture with new purposes. English words are no longer curiosities. They are threads twisted into a rope with others. No one writes this down at the time. It is too ordinary to write and too important to forget. Follow also, without hurry, the inland path. A river lifts beneath a canoe-like breath, beneath a lullaby. Fields sit in circles of understanding, corn and bean and squash, in conversation with wind and soil. An older town accepts new work at its edges. An iron hook in a doorway. A shard set to catch lamplight. A small stock of nails that migrate from one repair to another like useful birds. Rain comes with better manners here than it keeps at the sea. Drought still visits, but it does not stay so long. A child learns the river's tricky corners and the names of trees. One day, years from now, she will teach those names to her own children as if they had been born under those leaves, because by then they will have been. What, then, does the tide keep? It keeps the shape of leaving without panic, the clean bones of a village carried away to be used again. It keeps the way a father held a carved word in his mind when weather turned him back and would not let him pass. It keeps the whisper of a plan under paper, the warmth of a lamp in a London room. It keeps the proof that prefers to be called company. Iron glitter among shells, a European shard in native earth, a note, half rumour, half promise, crossing a desk 100 miles from the place it describes. Most of all, the tide keeps the lesson that survival is a quiet arithmetic, not a flourish, and that families do not vanish because a ledger loses their line. They move to where the bread rises and the voices answer when you call. In our own age, this one, with its bright screens and quick conclusions, men and women go on sifting the soil and the pages. They kneel in squares of string and shade, and they learn to think in afternoons, not headlines. They read wood rings and map patches, and the way a broken rim tells its birthplace by the clay it holds. They argue gently, and sometimes not so gently, and then they return to the work that outlasts argument, the slow raising of what was used and set down by people for whom a day's end meant supper, not footnotes. The coast answers by offering another small clue after rain, by giving the trowel a soft sound when it kisses something that was once part of a bowl in the corner of a room where laughter was ordinary. We can end in two places at once, because that is how this story breathes. Out at Roanoke, moonlight lays a quiet sheet across the old earthworks, and the sea speaks its patient syllables. The post where letters once shone has long since weathered to a pale memory. Still, if you stand and close your eyes, you can feel the strokes of that knife, steady as kindness. The wind repeats the word that once stood there, not as a mystery now, but as a direction still valid after centuries. To friends, to food, to safety, to a fire already burning. Across the water, on the long familiar island Old Croatoan, later Hatteras, the evening draws a ring of faces. Names are exchanged the way bread is, palm to palm. A story from one shore borrows a rhythm from the other and fits better than anyone expected. When a child falls asleep where the adults speak softly, it is a declaration no empire can substitute with ink. This is home, somewhere inland, near the mouth of a river that has learned to love its bends. Another circle of light does the same work, with different stars above it. Between the two, a rope of visits holds. Between both and Roanoke, memory holds. Between all of them and us, listening holds. We could go on, you can always go on when the subject is people finding ways to remain, but bedtime has its own good limits. And we have touched the necessary doors. What waited on a story of vanishing became instead a lesson in joining, in moving toward warmth rather than toward legend. The island between tides did what barrier islands do. It shifted, it tested, it insisted on weather. The people did what people do. They chose one another, and in the choosing became harder to lose. If you ever walk those sands, you may feel the old sentence under your feet, the one we've been reading all night without quite speaking. It says that history is a shore, not a cliff. It says that evidence arrives like tidewater, licking higher over time, leaving new lines to read at dawn. It says that a carved word can be a promise kept, even when a storm keeps one man from seeing its fulfillment. It says that the best stories end where life goes on, at a hearth, at a weir, in a garden path, down to a river, with a child reaching for a hand that has learned 2 languages and still has room for a third, the quiet language of belonging. Let us close our book not with a door, but with a window. Outside it, the grass moves like breathing, and the stars carry no burden to explain themselves. Inside, the last cup is rinsed. The last word for good night is spoken around the room in each voice that lives there. The tide, faithful as always, lays its silver at the sill and withdraws. In that soft rhythm, may you hear the answer we have circled toward. Not a vanishing act, but the oldest human art making a life from what the land offers and the neighbors share, until the myth dissolves and the ordinary shines. Chapter 7. The Shore We Walk. Dawn breathes a silver hush across the sound, and the reeds make their small, agreeable music. Far off, a pelican turns once and settles, as if placing a final period at the edge of water and sky. We have come a long way by gentle steps, from palisade and promise to canoe and field, from a carved direction on a weathered post, to fires that burned on Croatoan and along the inland bends. Tonight, we finish as we began, slowly, kindly, with our hands open to the tide. Walk with me once more along that narrow island, where ocean and sound argue softly all day, and reconcile each evening. Here the first city on paper learned the grammar of wind. Here a grandfather's hope became a word carved straight. Here a leaving without panic turned into a life. The shore remembers practical things. It remembers how timbers came down carefully and were carried, how rope was coiled, how a cradle was steadied by a neighbor's hand. It remembers the agreed-upon code. Mark your way, add a cross only if danger walks beside you, and the relief of finding no cross. It remembers a boat that tried to follow and could not, turned back by weather older than any flag. Out across the short run of water, other memories gather, nets rising with the day's small brightness, iron ringing against stone in a borrowed craft, bread broken in 2 languages until the crumbs took on one flavor. A child traced letters in sand, the same letters her grandfather once traced on a post, and watched them soften under a thin wave without fear, not vanished, only joined to the larger water. Farther inland, the river kept its patient pulse. Fields sat in their circles of understanding, corn and bean and squash speaking their old, companionable vows. A shard from another world caught lamplight on a sill. A hook of English iron learned a new doorway. Names widened to hold the place they lived. The drought loosened its grip in those bends, and the seasons resumed their older courtesy. We have listened, as the careful do, to quieter witnesses, 2 tree rings that tightened in the late 1580s, to the lamplit map that confessed a hidden fort upstream, to a traveller's line about grey eyes and talking in a book, to sherds and gunlocks and glittering hammerscale, raised where Croatoan homes once faced evening light. None speaks loudly. Together they make the soft chorus of ordinary survival. If you lean close, the island still tells the same lesson. Not every unanswered door is a catastrophe. Sometimes it is a threshold, and the room beyond is warm. Not every silence is a void. Sometimes it is a kindness, leaving space for households to become themselves, without a clerk's pen at the foot of the bed. And so, in the hush, we set down what we can keep. that a people moved toward, fires already burning. That friendship was a bridge when storms and lean years pressed. That evidence arrives like tidewater. First a line, then another, each new mark, making the morning's reading a little more complete. For those who like to know where the gentle facts were found, hold these names lightly in your mind as the wind turns. John White's clear-eyed drawings and the map he made, Thomas Heriot's plain, patient report of life along these coasts, the tree rings that scientists read like weather remembered in wood, John Lawson's coastal pages a century on, the Zoo IGA chart with its hearsay of survivors, and the quiet work of spades at Hatteras and on Salmon Creek, where English iron and pottery rose among Croatoan things. They are reeds, not trumpets, enough to weave a mat and sit upon it while the water speaks. Now let the dunes take back our footprints. Let the palisades soften to the same patient sand that first received it. Let the carved word stand, not as a riddle, but as a promise kept. Somewhere across a short water, evening gathers its circle. Bread, fish, a borrowed tool, a borrowed song that soon belongs. Somewhere inland, a child falls asleep to the river's measured breath. Between them flows the oldest human art. To remain, to belong, to make a life where the doors open. If one day you walk these barrier sands, you may hear all we have heard tonight. The tide reciting its steady lesson, the grass breathing like someone at peace, the distant thrum of a world that prefers headlines, and beneath it all the kinder sentence we have followed, not vanished, only woven elsewhere, not lost, only moved to where warmth waited. Now the water darkens to ink. The stars take their places without haste. The coast keeps its watch and asks nothing in return, but that we go softly when we ask it for its stories, and leave softly when the stories have been told. And so the night falls quiet, carrying their whispers into silence. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you never miss another whisper in the night. Until we meet again, good night.